Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. My name is Michelle Lavelle Henry. I'm a member of the Westminster Social Justice team. Our Social Justice Forums focus this program year is acting based on our values, avoiding despair, in which we seek to understand our continuing responsibility to help build a loving, sustainable, and just community. We are pleased to welcome this morning Steve Palmer, who is the Executive Director of the Westminster Counseling Center. Steve is a licensed marriage and family therapist. His presentation today is The Places That Scare You, in which he will explore fears many in our community are experiencing. He will discuss ways to cultivate the hope and courage needed to stay engaged in a world where we might rather pull in to places and spaces that keep us comfortable but disconnected. Steve has prepared several questions for discussion, which we'll hand out during the Q&A session portion of the forum and also put in the live stream chat. Now, for a few logistical items. We will try to hold questions, but Steve welcomes them during his presentation until after, but please feel free to chime in. For those attending in person, we'll bring a microphone to you to share questions and comments, so all, included those in the live stream, may hear your concerns. For those attending on the live stream, please submit your comments or questions in the live stream chat, and we'll monitor that and raise your questions during the Q&A period. Now, as a part of our ongoing effort to promote respectful conversation, our concern in our community, we have established guidelines that you will now see on the screen. Please take a few moments to review these guidelines before we start a short prayer. Let us pray. Holy One, God of justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, following the lead of voices from our community. Guide our speech and our self-awareness so that we may honor the divine in all people that we work with. Amen. So now, please welcome Steve Palmer.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Oh, sure. Thank you. Well, good morning. As Michelle said, my name is Steve Palmer. I'm the director over at the Counseling Center. I've been there about a year and a half, kind of working with a lot of folks to try to get the place relaunched and going. And just as a quick ad, I'll announce that we've just hired 3 part-time therapists to join me there. So make sure to spread the word, and anybody you know that might need to come our way, we're ready to be available and supportive. So I've been a therapist about 27 years. I need to sit down and count it out, but something like that. My standing joke is that you have a therapy practice for a reason. Someday you'll get good at it. You just keep practicing. So I'm doing the best I can. Pleased to be here today. After I got the invitation to speak to a social justice forum, I kind of found myself a little puzzled, thinking, what is it that I can bring to the conversation to be useful? I'm not particularly known for being a social activist, a community organizer, somebody who leads change in the environment around us. I'm more of a joiner and learning from others about how to engage in those efforts. But as a therapist in a kind of general counseling practices, off and on for a long time, I started to think about the people that I've been encountering and the issues they've been bringing, in particular over the last 7, 8, 9 years, as sort of social and political issues have created more and more conflict and challenge in our world. People are coming in, with the normal issues that bring folks to therapy: depression, anxiety, struggles in relationships or work, high stress. But they're adding in, there's this constant background or extra level of stress created by socio-political issues going on in our world. Increasing fear, anger, confusion. They're reporting a sense that they feel estranged or disconnected from family and friends, this sort of thing. So I looked a little bit, and the American Psychological Association did a survey in 2024 that found that this is actually happening all over the place. So there's a little bit of objective data to support what a lot of us are feeling subjectively. They found that the future of the nation was the leading cause of significant stress among adults, with nearly 8 in 10 reporting it as a major source of anxiety in their life. This is about a year ago. I wonder if it's higher now. The same study found that increasingly strained political climate has prompted about 2 in 5 people to consider moving to another state or another country, which is certainly something people share with me in therapy. Now, political anxiety, or the anxiety arising from these issues, is distinct from the anxiety challenges that we might have in the course of our regular life or diagnosable anxiety disorders, but they have very similar symptom profiles in terms of rumination, worry, fatigue, distress, a feeling of helplessness. And if somebody happens to have both of those going on in their life, they really play off each other and create a lot of emotional suffering and strain that we're seeing. And then one thing else I'd highlight from that survey is that people are increasingly reporting it impacting their relationships with friends and family, with 1 in 3 in that survey reporting that it was creating distance or causing them to change the way they related to people that they'd previously been close to. So this is a significant issue. So typically what I think about when I think of a social justice forum is what can we do to make the world a better place? So I've got here a sample list. There's a scholar named Timothy Snyder. Some of you may have heard of him or read some of his work. He was at Yale. He's a historian of Eastern European culture, particularly the Soviet Union, and the dynamics in authoritarian and fascist regimes and how those develop and change. He wrote a book in 2017 called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. So this is just an example of the sorts of things we think about trying to do, the actions we might engage in the world. It's a short book. I encourage you to take a look at it if you like it. He's recently moved to the University of Toronto in Canada, which I find interesting. He's moved out of the country. But anyway, the last of his points, and I'm not here today to talk about these, but to highlight what I'm going to try to bring. The last point on here is be as courageous as you can. Each of the other points, he has 6 or 8 pages of historical context, suggestions, practical ideas. After that one, I think he's got like a page. So I thought, well, this is an area that I'm supposed to know something about, the inner work of managing our fears, anxieties, concerns, stress, anger, frustration, and allowing that to engage us in the world in effective ways as we move through change. So I thought maybe that's something I could bring to the table today for our conversation. So the title of the talk that I chose, I'll hold on that for a second. The title of the talk that I picked today, The Places That Scare You, is actually the title of another book. As I tell my clients and my children, I have no original ideas, but I'm happy to recycle and integrate the thoughts of others. So there's a lovely Buddhist writer named Pema Chodron. She has an American name, but that's what it changed to when she became a Buddhist abbess, called The Places That Scare You, A Guide to Fearlessness in Difficult Times. I have read it. I am not fearless. She is over advertising, but she has lovely, beautiful things. And in the world of psychotherapy in the last 15 or 20 years, insights from contemplative traditions, in particular Buddhism and mindfulness, these sorts of things have really been working their way into the helping professions and receiving more and more scientific support as effective strategies for helping us manage and work with our emotions and engage in action effectively. So I just really loved the title. I won't be pulling too much from her very specific sorts of thoughts today, but another book that you could consider at some point if you're interested. But that's where the title comes from. So I was thinking that what I started to do was dig into what do we do when we're scared, and we call that courage, at least in some contexts. So I tried to begin looking a bit at the scientific literature, the psychological, social psychology, individual psychology literature about what helps us be brave, what makes us courageous. And I thought that's what I'd offer today. Certainly not the final word on this, as most things, there's lots of research ongoing. But I've got 8 points drawn from that literature that I'll share with you, that the folks who study and interview the people that seem to show up, who develop courage and engage in change on a personal level, maybe in their workplace and in civic and social settings, seem to have in common that they've consciously or unconsciously engaged in these 8, I'll call them sort of practice areas, to sort of build up to that place where they start to show up even when they're anxious. So we'll start with just a definition taken from one of those studies, I don't even remember which one right now, about what courage is. A voluntary action taken for a worthwhile or noble goal despite the presence of risk or fear. So I guess like when I was reading her book, the fear doesn't go away. We just get better at relating to it and working with it. Courage involves, therefore, these 4 things that kind of come up in the practices I'll share. There's an act of choosing to do something. There's the sense of being connected to purpose and meaning in the world. And then there's those tough things where there's a risk of some sort, small to large. We can imagine all sorts of risks we run into, and the resulting fear because we don't like what we're risking. So I'm just going to review these 8. I'll give some examples and some thoughts about them, but you're very welcome to, as a therapist, I tend to do back and forth. So I said to my wife this morning, I hope I prepared enough material. She rolled her eyes and said, honey, you can talk and talk and talk. I don't think you'll have any trouble. But as a therapist, I really do sort of more of the engaged conversation. So you're welcome if something really starts burning in you as I share any of these to interrupt and ask a question, or we'll have space at the end for sure. I have some reflection questions, or I'm happy to comment on whatever comes up for you. As I say, not an exhaustive list, but things that we see in the literature. So number 1 is self-awareness. This is the time we take to really begin to explore who we are, how we work internally, how we think about what we value, how our emotional styles work, what we do when we get scared, how we tend to react. So this self-awareness seems to be really necessary for effective action externally. In relationship therapy, like when we're talking to people about setting boundaries with a boss or finding a new way to relate to their sister or whatever it happens to be, we also suggest this. We say assertiveness, the ability to stand up for what you need, falls on a spectrum between passivity at one end, where I just put up with things and don't say anything, and aggressiveness at the other end, where I maybe overreact or I become angry, violent, either physically or emotionally, and I just sort of lose it. So those 2 extremes tend to not be terribly effective on a personal relationship level. So we have to weave the needle somewhere where we get to that place we call assertiveness. So that sort of work often begins with getting really self-aware about how I function as a person so that I can be prepared to effectively engage with other people. So I'm not surprised to see this in the literature. One of the pieces that psychology talks about a lot is a concept called cognitive biases. You know, there's these, as human beings, we'd like to think we see the truth clearly, wouldn't we? And we usually feel like we do. But that's a cognitive bias at times. We can feel something is so without really engaging in the world enough of logic to make sure that we're not just influenced by our own personal preferences, fears, concerns, history, background, whatever. So part of this work is watching our own biases and becoming aware of what gets in the way of us seeing the truth. I think it says somewhere in the gospel about removing the lumber from our own eye before we turn to take the speck out of others. Now, I think everybody's got a lumber, so we're all taking lumber out of our eyes and other people's eyes, but nonetheless. And just to kind of connect to Snyder's Eastern European and Soviet kind of historical stuff, there was an activist who was imprisoned for many years, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'm sure people have heard of him in the past. He has a lovely line in one of his books about the line separating good and evil, and he says, gradually it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. The line shifts, it oscillates with the years. Even hearts overwhelmed by evil, there's still a small bridgehead of good, and even in the best of all hearts, there remains an unuprooted small corner of evil. So I think it just points to the need to be self-aware so that we can move effectively and do the good thing in the world. So that's the first quality or practice. Obviously, my wife's right, I can talk and talk, so I could talk about self-awareness probably the rest of the time, but I'm self-aware enough to know I should move on. So, second practice area is connecting to meaning or purpose. As that definition of courage talked about, we move towards things that are valuable to us, and it's important that we've taken the time to clarify what those things are, recognize the competing values that we hold at times, and how we're going to sort of work with ordering those the best we can. Getting in touch with values and beliefs and deepening our awareness and commitment to them has been shown to help us develop courage. So I think of two examples related to this. There's a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps of World War II. His name is Viktor Frankl. Folks may have heard of him or even read his book. He has a book called Man's Search for Meaning that's kind of the best known. And his experience living as a prisoner in these camps and surviving while many people that he knew and loved died, his experience led him to wonder what contributes to people being able to survive these intense environments. And meaning and purpose is what he ultimately sort of focused in on, that he felt that people who had some sense of trying to help others or their particular religious beliefs or their social commitments, this allowed them to keep going under extraordinary duress. It's not the whole puzzle, of course. There's 8 practices, but I think it's a pretty important one. There's an approach to psychotherapy called acceptance and commitment therapy that I'm happy to talk about some other time, but the thing I notice about it is that it too highlights the importance of values just on the sort of personal psychology level. Our emotions fluctuate all day, every day, due to all sorts of reasons, and we need to accept that. But the thing that guides us towards a life that's ultimately more satisfying, they would suggest, is identifying our values and aligning our actions with those values. So I think that sort of resonates with this whole area. Third area, and this is the bread and butter of psychotherapy, is resilience and emotion regulation. Folks in the research they've done around people who show up and are courageous have learned to figure out what to do with their feelings is basically all this is. They've learned to tolerate discomfort and show up anyway, engage in actions when they feel anxious, unsure of themselves, or even outright scared. So this is the nuts and bolts of psychotherapy for people, but also the work we all do as parents to figure out how not to scream every time we feel like it, or coworkers who don't point out the thing that's driving us bananas about somebody. That capacity to manage our own emotions, be refreshed to re-engage each day or each week is an important piece of the puzzle, it seems, in people who manage to show up and be courageous. Makes me think of the whole area of, nonviolent communication. Again, sort of like that assertiveness. How do I learn to stand there and say what needs to be said, show up and assert for what's important, but do it in a way that allows it not to sort of devolve and fall apart based on my own emotional arousal at the time? Because I don't know about y'all, but I do less well the more distressed I get. So there's lots of things we could talk about there. There's advice out there these days about how to manage political stress. That fits into this, limiting and choosing what news sources you look at, how often you read it, staying informed without getting overwhelmed. But an interesting thing in the research on how to manage the stress related to the political world is that taking some sort of action actually often relieves our stress to some degree. So there's a relationship between action and emotional regulation. I think I hit on everything I want to there. So the fourth area highlighted in this research is the importance of supportive relationships and community. Making any kind of change in our life is hard to do alone. It's always easier when we have somebody with us, somebody in our corner, somebody supporting or challenging us. And so that seems to be true on this level of trying to engage and make change in the world. Having people around who offer empathy, encouragement, and accountability improves our mental health, reduces stress, and increases our capacity for resilience. They buffer fear and reinforce courage. The example that came to mind for me right away was one from maybe many of you have heard this in like a high school psychology or like a Psych 101 class. There's a famous study of a very sad situation where a woman was murdered in the alley in New York City. So many people could hear from their apartment buildings that this was going on as she screamed and called for help. And later interviews of people discovered that lots of people heard something happening and didn't do much. There's some questions still called into reviewing this study, but nonetheless, it began this conversation about what's called the bystander effect. That's what Timothy Snyder says at the top of his list, don't be a bystander. So community can work for us, but social realities can sort of keep us from doing things sometimes too. So there's this notion that these folks who didn't intervene weren't evil, bad people. They just thought maybe somebody else would do it, or it felt a little uncomfortable. They weren't sure what to do. So responsibility can sort of diffuse a bit in a crowd situation. And so finding ways to kind of overcome that impulse that happens to us all naturally is an important part of it. And then just one other piece related to this. I read a book a couple of years ago called Fascism, A Warning by Madeleine Albright, who was a Secretary of State in the past. And she mentioned something in that I went and dug up. So this isn't about her book. It's about this study that she mentions done by some, I'm guessing they were like social psychologists or political theorists, but they did this study of 323 violent and nonviolent resistant campaigns from 1900 to 2006, these other folks. And they found that nonviolent campaigns were twice as likely as violent to succeed in making social change. And they found that any of these campaigns that mobilized 3.5% of the general population or above seemed to have success more often. So when I think about community and relationships, I was really encouraged to think, it doesn't take like half the country to make something happen. It just takes a good, engaged, sustained effort by a group of committed people. So I think community can work for or against us in terms of like social psychology. So just highlight those as we think about how to connect to relationships that help us be brave. This is a lot of information. I hope it's not coming at you too fast. I just wanted to share a bunch of stuff and then start conversation. If it's useful to anybody, I don't think anybody prepared this here. They did print off the questions I have, but I'd be happy to assemble all this into some little document that could be shared so people could review it at some point if they're interested. None of it's my ideas, like I said, so I'm happy to share everybody else's ideas. So this fifth area that they saw in the research for people that were showing up as brave is what we call cognitive reframing. This is specifically a strategy about how people worked with the fear that they felt. So if I'm going to speak to a neighbor about something or stand up at work about something, I'm going to have that anxiety emerge. And this was a specific tool, again, whether people called it this or not, that they were engaging in. This comes out of an approach to therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, that recognizes what we feel and the behaviors we engage in are strongly influenced by the way we think about what's going on, our thoughts, thus cognitive reframing. We may not be aware we're thinking that way right away, but these are the beliefs, ideas, perspectives that we're carrying around. And pulling those forward to become aware and working with them has been shown to help people with anxiety, depression, anger, all sorts of things. It's one of the most researched approaches in psychotherapy. So folks in these studies were doing cognitive reframing, which means looking at the experience of fear in different ways that would nudge them to action rather than avoidance, which is what fear mostly tells us to do, right? Go home, get under the covers, have some chocolate. So it's about this process of looking at the fear and thinking about it differently. A sort of silly analogy, but I think has some weight to it, is that they've suggested that research shows that the physiological experience of fear is very similar to the physiological experience of excitement. So if you're about to get on a roller coaster, which I hate, by the way, some people, my wife, for instance, think this is going to be amazing. And I'm like, we're going to die. And the difference is not our physiological arousal, according to the research I've seen, but the way that we've come to believe what's going to happen will unfold, right? So that's a sort of example of what they're talking about here, finding ways to think about the fear, connect it to values, consider it as an opportunity for growth, see it as doing something good and important in the world. These are things that help people take those courageous steps. And then just to connect back to the cognitive bias thing, this is the last book I'll mention, I promise. There's a psychologist and a writer that I really, really like named Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. He's pretty well known right now for speaking about social media and phone use in teens. He's doing a lot of research about that. He's got a book called The Anxious Generation. But this book that I came across in, I think it's from 2010 or 11, is called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And it's just replete with research and his perspective. Again, not the final word on anything, but a really good, intriguing read. And the point I want to take from that is to remind us that whatever our perspective is doesn't mean that the other people are evil and horrible. There's reasons of why everybody comes to where they are with their perspective. And I think effective action for change involves having some sort of dialogue that moves towards constructive, thoughtful, as far as possible, compassionately understanding one another. Because there's certainly lots of sincere people with differences. I'm not saying it always works out that way. I respect that the world is complex and messy. But just to highlight, this cognitive reframing has to do with ourselves and the way we experience fear, but maybe also about how we view the other folks that we might be in dialogue or conflict with. This is the sixth area of practice. This one also is pretty straightforward. It's the idea of incremental exposure, which is just a fancy way to say practice it. So if we do little things that involve a bit of bravery and a tiny bit of anxiety, our brain starts to realize that we can do the next thing probably as well. And so if we aspire to be involved, engaged, and courageous, we can start with small things and take those steps a little at a time. And our brain kind of updates its information and perspective. As a therapy example, I've worked with people, quite a few people actually, who've been in pretty horrific car accidents. And they're often quite afraid to drive again or get back into a car, or worse, have somebody else drive while they're sitting in the passenger seat. So we use this approach. I mean, this is well supported in psychotherapy research. We'll have them sit in the car in the garage. Just that first step of opening the door, sitting in there, and practicing what it is to try to begin to realize they can handle this and let their brain catch up with that, the systems that aren't in conscious control, and then move towards maybe just backing down the driveway, up and down the driveway, this sort of thing, which can induce near panic in somebody who's been in a horrific accident. So it's that same idea. Over time, they can start driving down small streets, larger streets, in and out of traffic, back to the highway, whatever. So this principle seems to be held amongst those who have become courageous, involved folks, that they practiced with small things and worked their way up. My quote with this, I'm just working this in because I like the quote, is from a humorist who said, I think I put this in one of my news articles too, so you may have heard this. Everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to help mom do the dishes. I mean, we can become helpless because we think of the size of the challenges we're trying to address in the world. But truthfully, it's lots of little things that seem to add up to make these changes, and it's a good way to practice our behavior. So whatever the equivalent of helping mom do the dishes is in terms of social change in your world is a completely reasonable place to begin. So number 7 that they found that sort of inspired, engaged, and helped people was really paying attention to role models and the stories of others who've done courageous things. I thought right away of a book I've never read called Profiles in Courage by John Kennedy, which is sort of doing this, right? Telling the stories of people who have done acts of courage and bravery in the face of complicated and difficult social situations. And we can learn from them, be inspired by that, recognize how people become capable of doing those sorts of things. And that's a valuable way to sort of develop our courage. I took that to heart when I was doing the research, and I pulled off my shelf this biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but the Lutheran pastor who did a lot of work in Germany during the Nazi years and was ultimately killed by them. The biography is this thick, so I think I'm going to be getting into the specific detail of how he slowly developed his capacity to figure out what to do and how to do it despite whatever he may have been experiencing. So reading these things can help us compare ourselves and learn about how we can take steps in that direction too. And the last of these things that they discovered in people is sort of connected to that previous one about meaning and purpose. It's a spiritual or philosophical anchoring of their motivations and reasons for doing things. So meaning and purpose can encompass a lot of things, all sorts of values, but spiritual, as you can imagine, or philosophical anchoring has to do with sort of these transcendent beliefs we might all hold about the value of human beings, or our belief about what God's at work doing in the world, or how we participate in that work. So, everything from prayer to ritual to liturgy to the lives of the spiritual heroes that we pursue, these things can kind of galvanize the other areas in a way and help us move forward. I think this is, for me, is where that book by Pema Chodron about the places that scare you comes in. Buddhism, at least as she presents it, has its own sort of faith in this fundamental goodness. I'll have a final quote that I share that when I read her description of this work of getting brave, it sounds really, really Christian to me. And I find it quite inspiring and beautiful. I've also recently been sort of looking more into the work of a theologian named Jürgen Moltmann, who was a German Lutheran theologian, came much later, but he'd written a book called The Theology of Hope, or something along those lines, and then started realizing, oh my gosh, a lot has happened, and I need to take a look at the other side of things, and wrote a book called The Crucified God, that for me is just a startling kind of way to present and think about those spiritual things. I'm not trying to tell you all what to think, but we're in a Christian world, we're talking in a church, so I'm going to toss some of these things out there. And that image of his way of thinking about God identifying not just sort of from a distance with our suffering, but entering into it, participating in it, and giving us the capacity, therefore, to see our own struggle and suffering in different ways. And, didn't always look like it was going to end well in that context, right? Which I think is some of the things we fear and we need to face. So these sorts of things, I think getting in touch with those sources are the sort of things that they see in the research help people be brave, and I think we can kind of explore for ourselves as we go. So those are the 8 areas of practice, if you will, that I found in the literature that I wanted to share with you and offer for your reflection and thinking about. Like most good therapists, I talked a lot without having to say too much in some ways. I can't promise anything, but I think there's good support that these can help us grow as we try to figure out what are we going to do to address the things we're concerned about in the world. So I've got some reflection questions. Shall I just flip to those now? And yeah. So I don't know how y'all would like to do this. I think we could take a few minutes where you look at, obviously you can't answer all these right now, but pick one out that resonates for you or anything that occurred to you during the conversation. Maybe we can share at the tables and at home if you have someone to talk to or you want to journal just a little, just to start to pull on what I was describing today, see how it sounds to you, what reflects for you, what is interesting or what you don't like, disagree with, or puzzled by. And then we can kind of reconvene. I don't know how much time we have exactly. Oh, sorry, did you have a question over there?
I do have a question. While people are getting familiar with this, there's a question on the chat about the names of the books and the authors. Could you just run through those again real quickly for
Sure.
the people listening in?
Yeah,
How about you send those to me?
I was just gonna
and,
say.
people can email me for that list.
I'd be
And
happy.
this is Elena.
Thanks, Elena. I'd be happy to do that. Either one, to repeat them, but also to put it together so it's easy for people to look at. And maybe a quick list of these 8 strategies so that you have something to remind you of it if it seems useful. So why don't y'all talk amongst yourselves for a little bit, as they say, and then we'll reconvene for any dialogue or questions. I'm happy to respond to anything as well. Thank you. All right, why don't we, I'm so glad to see great conversations going on, but just in the interests of time, maybe we can come back together. I don't know if there's anything, maybe we'll take like 5 minutes to share a little together, or if anybody has a question I can address from what I talked about today. Then I have one last quote, and I know Michelle has some announcements.
No, I just wanted to bring the group now together from our small groups into the larger group to entertain questions or things, just a couple of talking points that came out of your conversations. We'll just take a few minutes for that.
Hi, I just wanted to highlight, many of you probably already know this, but Mary Ann Edgar Booty, I believe is her name, Reverend, who is the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C., has written a book entitled How We Learn to Be Brave, which is an excellent book. I assume it's in the Westminster Library. It's certainly available in other settings. And she is coming to speak at the Town Hall Forum in November, those of you who know, December 4th. So that is another source of potential thought about how we learn to be brave. So,
Thank you. Anyone else would like to share table perspectives or thoughts?
Well, I just want to contribute with one perspective from the Islamic tradition. And according to my understanding, Islam is not a religion, but a state of mind and condition of heart. So in that tradition, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him, say that if you see something wrong, you can change it with your hand or with your tongue or with your heart, and thus is the lesser faith.
That's lovely.
Thank you very much for
Thank
sharing
you.
your perspective. Is there anyone else that would like to contribute? Thank you.
Good morning. I'll just add to also look at, in the midst of getting overwhelmed with everything that seems to need to be done, know what your strength is and know what your gift is, and focus on that piece and just do what you are called to do. One of the things that I'll remind people as we start to take on things that we shouldn't take on is there were a lot of things going on when Jesus came to earth. But he was very clear about what his assignment was, and he just did his assignment. And so if you look, when Jesus died, there were things that were quote unquote undone, but those weren't things he was supposed to do. So if we each understand what are the things that we're supposed to do and just do our jobs, that's all we're called to do. We can pray about the other things, we can ask God to send the right people at the right time, but just do what we're supposed to do, and that will keep us less overwhelmed. The other thing that we can do, since we're talking in a church, we can pray, and we can start with the day with, Lord, what would you have me do? And I'll often say, Lord, you know I don't hear well, so I need you to be extra clear, speak extra loudly, be very bold signs, whatever it is. But Lord, please make very clear to me, what is the thing that I'm supposed to do? And then give me the courage to do it, and help me keep from getting distracted and trying to do something that I'm not called to do.
That's beautiful. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much. Is there anything in the chat? Okay.
Okay, well, I'll just close quick with this quote from the book that I took the title from. I think I had it up by accident a minute ago, so you might have already read it. But this is lovely. I changed a couple Buddhist sounding terms in brackets to something that I think translated it well in what she was trying to say, so it would make sense. But she says, in the journey of the compassionate warrior, kind of taking on this hard work of facing scary things, the journey goes down, not up. It's as if the mountain pointed toward the center of the earth instead of reaching into the sky. Instead of transcending the suffering of all creatures, we move toward the turbulence and doubt. We jump into it, we slide into it, we tiptoe into it. We move toward it however we can. We explore the reality and unpredictability of insecurity and pain, and we try not to push it away. If it takes years, we let it be as it is. At our own pace, without speed or aggression, we move down and down and down. With us move millions of others, our companions in awakening from fear. At the bottom, we discover water, the healing water of loving kindness. Right down there in the thick of things, we discover the love that will not die. It sounds really Christian to me, frankly. I don't think she'd be offended to hear that, but that resonates with that sort of crucified God, that Paschal mystery we all participate in to be part of God's project. And I think just doing our piece as we can is a great way to think about that. So thanks for having me today. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you, Steve, for sharing your insights and perspective. Next Sunday is World Communion Sunday. Please watch for more information about the forum via Westminster's communication channels. Thank you very much.